hey, we need you. Let's look at the Washington Commanders game. I got kicked out. I was nowhere near to play. Nowhere near to play. Everybody was fed up with me, and I'm like...
September 22nd, 2025. One sideline confrontation. 5 million views. One career destroyed. C.J. Gardner-Johnson's explosive moment with the Houston Texans went viral for all the wrong reasons. But to understand why this happened, you need to know what kind of player Gardner-Johnson really is on the field. The explosive sideline confrontation that broke the internet. The NFL world was turned upside down on September 22nd, 2025, when a single piece of sideline footage from the Houston Texans' devastating loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars went absolutely viral, accumulating millions upon millions of views and ultimately ending a player's tenure with the team before the sun had even set on the following day. This wasn't just any ordinary sideline altercation that we sometimes see in the heat of competition. This was something that would spark debates about leadership, toxicity, and the very nature of accountability in professional football, while simultaneously exposing the deep-rooted dysfunction that had been festering within one of the NFL's most promising young organizations. The man at the center of this firestorm was none other than C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a veteran safety whose fiery personality and competitive spirit had already made him one of the most polarizing figures in the league throughout his career spanning multiple franchises. But what happened during those crucial moments in the fourth quarter of a blowout loss would prove to be the breaking point that shattered his relationship with the Houston Texans organization forever, creating ripple effects that would influence not just his own career trajectory, but the entire culture and direction of a franchise that had entered the season with Super Bowl aspirations. Picture this scene unfolding in real time. The Texans are trailing significantly against the Jacksonville Jaguars, their defense struggling mightily to contain the dynamic quarterback Trevor Lawrence and the explosive young receiver Brian Thomas Jr., who had been torching Houston's secondary all afternoon long. The team is sitting at an embarrassing 0-3 record to start the season, a devastating fall from grace for an organization that had captured the AFC South Division title just 2 years prior and seemed poised for continued success. Frustrations are boiling over on the sideline as players, coaches, and staff watch their championship dreams slowly dissolving before their very eyes with each missed tackle, blown coverage, and failed communication. It's in this pressure cooker environment, with emotions running at their absolute peak and the weight of unmet expectations crushing down on everyone involved, that Gardner-Johnson spots a teammate, widely speculated to be either rookie quarterback Caleb Williams or young safety Kalen Bullock, walking away from the field in what appears to be dejection or disengagement after yet another defensive breakdown that had allowed Jacksonville to march down the field with ease. The specific identity of this teammate would become a source of endless speculation and debate among fans and analysts, with some arguing it was the young quarterback who had been struggling with the pressure of living up to his draft status, while others insisted it was Bullock, the rookie safety who had been exposed repeatedly in coverage throughout the early part of the season. What happens next would become the defining moment that would end Gardner-Johnson's brief tenure in Houston and create one of the most viral NFL moments of the entire 2025 season. The veteran safety, known throughout his career for his intense competitive fire and uncompromising leadership style that had both inspired and alienated teammates across multiple organizations, reaches out and physically grabs his teammate by the collar of their jersey, yanking them back toward him with considerable force while shouting the now infamous words that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms. "Come here."
People joking with me. So I look at it, I'm like, all right. But people don't understand, before all of that, this man's ex-girlfriend was at the game, courtesy of one of the members. Like, that has nothing to do with me, so I'm just, all right, y'all want me to do it? All right, cool.
The interaction that follows is captured in stunning, unfiltered detail by fan-recorded video from the sidelines, showing Gardner-Johnson pulling the player close while delivering what appears to be an animated mixture of motivation, frustration, and reprimand. The footage reveals layers of emotion and tension that go far beyond a simple coaching moment or teammate accountability session. This is a veteran player who clearly feels the weight of the team's failures and is desperately trying to salvage something from what has become a completely lost season in just 3 short weeks. The visual impact of this confrontation cannot be overstated, and it's precisely why the footage would go on to dominate social media feeds and sports talk shows for days afterward. Here you have a veteran player, someone who's supposed to be a stabilizing leader on this defense, physically manhandling a teammate on national television during one of the most crucial and high-pressure moments of the game. The camera captures every nuanced detail, Gardner-Johnson's intense, almost desperate expression as he tries to rally his team and assert some form of control over a situation that has clearly spiraled beyond beyond anyone's ability to manage, contrasted sharply with the visible discomfort and genuinely awkward reaction of the teammate being confronted. The body language alone tells a story of dysfunction and miscommunication that extends far beyond this single moment. The teammate being grabbed appears genuinely shocked and uncomfortable, suggesting this type of aggressive confrontation may not have been normal or expected within the team's culture. Other players visible in the background seem to be watching the interaction with a mixture of concern and resignation, as if this type of outburst from Gardner-Johnson had become increasingly common throughout their brief time together. The timing of this outburst makes it even more significant and problematic from both a football and public relations perspective. This isn't happening during a timeout, a break between series, or any other natural pause in the action where such a conversation might be more appropriate. This is occurring with approximately 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, right in the middle of what would become the Jaguars' methodical, game-winning drive that would effectively end any hope the Texans had of avoiding a 0-3 start to their season. The Texans' secondary had just been torched again, this time allowing a massive 46-yard touchdown pass to Brian Thomas Jr. that showcased all of the communication breakdowns and coverage busts that had plagued the unit throughout the early part of the season. The defensive miscommunication that led to that explosive play had directly involved Gardner-Johnson himself, making his subsequent emotional outburst toward a teammate appear even more problematic and potentially hypocritical to observers who were dissecting every frame of the available footage. What makes this moment even more dramatically ironic is what happens immediately afterward in the game. Despite the emotional confrontation and the obvious tension it created among players on the sideline, Gardner-Johnson somehow manages to channel that raw intensity and frustration into making a spectacular interception on the very next defensive series. The ball literally falls into his hands as if the football gods were providing some cosmic commentary on the complexity of his personality and playing style. However, even this moment of individual brilliance and redemption couldn't salvage what had already become a disaster of a game for the Texans, and more importantly for Gardner-Johnson's future with the organization. It couldn't undo the damage that had been done to his relationship with coaches, teammates, and team management. The footage begins spreading like wildfire across social media platforms within hours of the game's conclusion, demonstrating the incredible speed and reach of modern digital communication. On X, formerly known as Twitter, the clip rapidly accumulates views at an unprecedented rate, with users sharing, commenting, analyzing, and dissecting every frame of the confrontation with the intensity typically reserved for major political events or celebrity scandals. The algorithmic nature of social media platforms ensures that the most dramatic and controversial content rises to the top of feeds, and this footage had all the elements necessary to capture and hold public attention. By the morning of September 23rd, just hours after the game had ended, the video had already surpassed 5 million views across various platforms, with that number continuing to climb exponentially as major sports media outlets picked up the story and began incorporating the footage into their coverage. Trending hashtags like #CJJ drama and #Texans meltdown began dominating the sports conversation on social media, creating a viral moment that transcended typical NFL news cycles and entered the broader cultural conversation. On the opposing side of this heated debate, critics view the incident as fundamentally unprofessional and potentially divisive, especially considering the very public nature of the confrontation and the already fragile psychological state of a team that was struggling with confidence and cohesion. They argue that this kind of physical confrontation, captured on camera for millions of viewers to analyze and judge, does nothing constructive for the team's performance while simultaneously embarrassing the organization and creating additional layers of tension in what was already proving to be a very fragile locker room situation. The immediate fallout and Gardner-Johnson's controversial Houston tenure. The viral footage of C.J. Gardner-Johnson's sideline confrontation would prove to be merely the visible tip of an iceberg that had been forming beneath the surface throughout his brief and increasingly tumultuous tenure with the Houston Texans. What the public witnessed in those explosive few seconds was actually the culmination of weeks of mounting tension, behind-the-scenes friction, and fundamental disagreements about Gardner-Johnson's role, behavior, and fit within an organization that was desperately trying to establish a winning culture while managing a roster full of young, impressionable players who were still learning how to be professionals at the highest level of football. The swiftness and decisiveness of the Texans' response to the viral incident speaks volumes about the deteriorated state of Gardner-Johnson's relationship with virtually every level of the organization, from front office executives to coaching staff to teammates, within mere hours of the game's conclusion, before most fans had even finished processing and discussing the footage on social media platforms. The Houston Texans made the shocking and unprecedented decision to release the veteran safety, cutting ties completely with a player they had actively pursued and traded valuable assets to acquire just months earlier. This wasn't a move made in haste, emotion, or the heat of the moment following a disappointing loss. According to multiple sources within the organization who spoke to various media outlets in the aftermath of the decision, this was the culmination of an ongoing evaluation process that had been building toward this conclusion for several weeks. The viral footage simply provided the final piece of evidence that convinced team decision makers that Gardner-Johnson's presence was more detrimental than beneficial to their long-term goals and organizational culture. The financial implications of this decision underscored just how serious and irreconcilable the situation had become from the perspective of team management. By cutting Gardner-Johnson after only 3 games into what was supposed to be a multi-year relationship, the Texans willingly absorbed a devastating $3.4 million in dead cap space for the 2025 season, with an additional $5.7 million financial penalty looming for the 2026 season. For any NFL organization to voluntarily take on nearly $10 million in dead money for a player who had started every game and was expected to be a key contributor to their defensive success, it signals that the underlying issues and conflicts went far deeper and were far more serious than a single sideline outburst or moment of poor judgment. To understand how the situation reached this dramatic breaking point, we need to examine Gardner-Johnson's entire tenure with the Texans, which had begun with such promise and optimism back in March 2025. The trade that brought him to Houston from the Philadelphia Eagles seemed like a masterstroke at the time, a shrewd move by general manager Nick Caserio that would address one of the team's most glaring weaknesses while adding veteran leadership to a secondary that was still developing its identity and chemistry. The Texans surrendered guard Kenyon Green and a 5th-round pick to acquire a proven veteran safety who had just recorded 6 interceptions during an outstanding 2024 season with Philadelphia, demonstrating both his ball skills and his ability to make game-changing plays when his team needed them most. The statistical production was impressive, but even more important was the leadership and experience he was supposed to bring to a young defensive unit that was trying to establish itself as a championship-caliber group. The expectations surrounding Gardner-Johnson's arrival were enormous and perhaps unrealistic in retrospect. He was brought in to be the veteran presence that would stabilize and elevate a young secondary featuring rising stars like Derek Stingley Jr., who had just signed a massive contract extension, and rookie safety Kalen Bullock, who was expected to develop into a cornerstone player for the franchise's future. His versatility, ball skills, and experience in high-pressure situations were supposed to be the missing pieces that would elevate the Texans' defense from good to great, complementing an already impressive and developing pass rush led by the dynamic Will Anderson Jr. However, the warning signs and red flags were there almost from the very beginning of his time in Houston, even during the seemingly optimistic honeymoon period that typically follows major trades. During training camp, Gardner-Johnson suffered a knee injury that sidelined him for several practices, creating early concerns about his physical condition, preparation methods, and overall availability for the grueling NFL season ahead. While injuries are certainly common and often unavoidable in professional football, this particular setback seemed to set a negative tone that would persist throughout his brief tenure with the organization. But the physical issues and injury concerns were absolutely nothing compared to the personality clashes and cultural conflicts that were quietly developing behind the scenes, away from media coverage and public scrutiny. According to detailed reports from multiple NFL insiders with direct knowledge of the situation, Gardner-Johnson quickly began expressing dissatisfaction and frustration with his role in defensive coordinator Matt Burke's system, which required a different skill set and mentality than what he had become accustomed to during his successful stint in Philadelphia.
And I do think a lot of times it's because of the perception of you being a wild card or crazy or uncontrollable, whatever it is. But your play says Pro Bowl caliber, all pro caliber play. Why aren't you, after winning a championship, 2 times in Philadelphia, bro, 6 picks each of those years?
The veteran safety, who had thrived in Philadelphia's more aggressive and blitz-heavy defensive scheme that allowed him to showcase his versatility and playmaking ability, reportedly pushed consistently and persistently for increased opportunities to rush the passer and make plays closer to the line of scrimmage. However, the Texans' defensive philosophy and system required him to play a more traditional and conservative safety role, focusing primarily on deep coverage responsibilities and serving as a communication hub for the younger, less experienced players in the secondary secondary who were still learning the intricate details of NFL defensive concepts. These tactical disagreements and philosophical differences were significantly compounded by interpersonal issues and personality conflicts that were beginning to fester and spread throughout the locker room like a virus. Multiple sources with direct access to team meetings and practice sessions indicate that Gardner-Johnson had become increasingly vocal and critical about his teammates' performance, preparation methods, and overall commitment to excellence, sometimes crossing the line from constructive criticism and veteran leadership into personal attacks and character assassination. The most damaging reports suggest that he made inappropriate and unprofessional comments about fellow defensive backs' contracts and physical attributes, allegedly referring to some players as being overpaid for their size, and publicly questioning whether they possessed the mental toughness and competitive fire necessary for critical moments in high-pressure situations. These types of comments are particularly destructive in a professional locker room environment because they attack not just performance but personal worth and character. The situation was particularly delicate and explosive because many of these harsh criticisms and personal attacks were being directed at players who were absolutely central to the Texans' future plans and organizational identity. Derek Stingley Jr., who had just signed a massive $34.6 million contract extension that represented the team's long-term commitment to building their defense around his talents, was reportedly one of the primary targets of Gardner-Johnson's increasingly frequent and harsh commentary about teammate performance and dedication. Kalen Bullock, the promising rookie safety who was still learning the enormous mental and physical demands of playing safety at the NFL level while trying to establish himself as a reliable contributor, was another young player who found himself on the receiving end of Gardner-Johnson's harsh evaluations and public criticism. For a rookie trying to gain confidence and establish his place in the league, this type of treatment from a veteran teammate can be particularly damaging and counterproductive. The confrontation required direct intervention from both officials and coaching staff from both teams, creating an embarrassing spectacle that reflected poorly on Gardner-Johnson's judgment and self-control. While such interactions and verbal sparring are certainly not uncommon in the NFL's intensely competitive environment, this particular incident served as another significant red flag about Gardner-Johnson's ability to control his competitive intensity and channel it in productive rather than destructive directions. By the time Week 3 arrived, sources close to the organization with direct knowledge of internal discussions indicate that Gardner-Johnson had actually formally requested a trade, expressing his explicit desire to move to a different team that would better utilize his specific skills and be more tolerant of his intense personality and uncompromising approach to the game. The timing of this trade request, coming just 2 weeks into the regular season and after the organization had invested significant resources in acquiring him, demonstrates just how quickly and completely the relationship had deteriorated beyond any hope of repair. Head coach DeMeco Ryans had initially praised Gardner-Johnson's energy and competitive passion when the trade was first completed, speaking glowingly about the veteran leadership and playoff experience he would bring to a young team. However, sources within the organization indicate that his perspective and evaluation had changed dramatically and completely by the time September rolled around. As the reality of managing Gardner-Johnson's personality became increasingly difficult and counterproductive, the coaching staff had reportedly grown frustrated and concerned with Gardner-Johnson's inability to mesh with the team's carefully cultivated culture and his persistent tendency to create controversy, conflict, and negative headlines rather than providing solutions and leadership during challenging moments. For an organization trying to establish a winning culture and develop young players, this type of disruptive influence can be absolutely devastating to long-term success. The ripple effects and what this means for both sides. The release of C.J. Gardner-Johnson sent shockwaves throughout the NFL that extended far beyond the immediate impact on the Houston Texans' roster construction and defensive depth chart. This wasn't just the simple story of one talented but difficult player parting ways with one organization due to personality conflicts. It was a defining moment that would significantly influence Gardner-Johnson's career trajectory and reputation throughout the league, expose deeper systemic issues within the Texans organization regarding talent evaluation and cultural fit, and serve as a comprehensive case study for how modern NFL teams must balance the acquisition of pure talent with the equally important consideration of cultural compatibility and locker room chemistry. For Gardner-Johnson personally, this sudden and very public release represents both a significant professional setback that could impact his earning potential and reputation, and simultaneously a potential opportunity for redemption and a fresh start with an organization that might be better suited to harness his intensity and competitive fire in positive ways. At 27 years old, he finds finds himself in the highly unusual and somewhat precarious position of being a talented, statistically proven player with demonstrable skills who is suddenly available on the free agent market in the middle of the season, which immediately raises questions about his character and coachability among potential suitors. His track record and statistical production certainly speak for themselves and provide compelling evidence of his abilities when properly utilized and managed. 6 interceptions with Philadelphia during the 2024 season, 71 tackles, and the proven versatility to play multiple positions effectively in the secondary. These are exactly the kind of impressive statistics and demonstrated skills that typically guarantee a player not just job security, but significant financial compensation and long-term contracts. Yet here he was, despite this proven production, looking for his next opportunity just 3 games into what was supposed to be a multi-year relationship with the Texans. The interest from other NFL organizations was both immediate and significant, demonstrating that despite the concerning circumstances surrounding his release, there are still teams willing to take calculated risks on talented players who might simply need the right environment and coaching approach to succeed. Multiple detailed reports from credible NFL insiders indicate that organizations like the Philadelphia Eagles, New Orleans Saints, and Baltimore Ravens quickly reached out to Gardner-Johnson's representatives to gauge his availability, interest level, and contract expectations. The Philadelphia Eagles, in particular, represent an especially intriguing possibility for a reunion that could benefit both parties involved. Given Gardner-Johnson's documented success in their defensive system and their intimate familiarity with both his considerable strengths as a playmaker and his well-documented challenges as a teammate and locker room presence, they would be uniquely positioned to maximize his contributions while minimizing potential disruptions to team chemistry and culture.
We were talking about it when you was coming. I was like, bro, from Florida, you cover so much ground. I think that's your greatness.
This level of genuine self-awareness and willingness to actively seek help and guidance suggests that Gardner-Johnson clearly understands the need for continued personal growth and behavioral adaptation. His honest acknowledgement that he's still learning how to express his feelings and frustrations without resorting to anger, combined with his commitment to prayer, therapy, and seeking wise counsel from trusted mentors, indicates a player who is actively working to evolve beyond the controversies and conflicts that have followed him throughout his career. For the Houston Texans organization, Gardner-Johnson's abrupt departure created both immediate tactical challenges that would impact their on-field performance and long-term strategic questions about their roster construction philosophy, talent evaluation processes, and team-building approach that could influence their decision-making for years to come. The secondary, which had already been identified as a potential weakness coming into the season, suddenly found itself even more depleted and lacking the veteran leadership and experience that Gardner-Johnson was supposed to provide. Derek Stingley Jr. and Kalen Bullock, both talented players but still in their early 20s and relatively inexperienced at the professional level, were now being asked to anchor and stabilize a defensive unit without the benefit of an experienced safety to guide them through the enormous mental and physical complexities of NFL coverage schemes, pre-snap reads, and in-game adjustments. This additional pressure and responsibility could potentially impact their individual development and the overall effectiveness of the defensive unit. The defensive struggles that predictably followed Gardner-Johnson's release were both immediate and concerning, validating some of the criticism about the timing and wisdom of the decision. The unit that had already allowed over 400 yards through the air in 2 of the first 3 games continued to be vulnerable to big plays, miscommunications, and coverage breakdowns that directly contributed to losses and missed opportunities for the team to establish momentum and confidence. The absence of Gardner-Johnson's proven ball skills, coverage ability, and game experience became particularly apparent in crucial moments and high-pressure situations, where his veteran instincts and playmaking ability might have made the difference between defensive stops and explosive plays that changed the trajectory of games. While his personality and behavior had become problematic, his on-field contributions and football intelligence were still valuable assets that would be difficult to replace. The complexity of Gardner-Johnson's personality and his understanding of how his role models influenced his approach becomes evident in this introspective moment. The broader NFL community watched this entire situation unfold with great interest and attention, as it highlighted several important and evolving trends in modern team building, player development, and organizational management. The balance between pure talent and character has always been a consideration for NFL organizations throughout the league's history, but the Gardner-Johnson case represents an extreme and well-documented example of how quickly a mismatch can develop and escalate when there are fundamental incompatibilities between a player's personality and an organization's culture. The ripple effects of this situation extended far beyond the immediate parties involved, reaching other young players around the league who might be watching and learning important lessons from Gardner Gardner-Johnson's experience about the importance of emotional intelligence, cultural fit, and professional behavior. The message was clear and unambiguous. Talent alone is not sufficient for sustained NFL success, and teams are increasingly willing to make difficult and costly decisions when player behavior conflicts with organizational culture and values. For head coach DeMeco Ryans, the Gardner-Johnson situation represented both a significant challenge that tested his leadership and decision-making abilities, and simultaneously an opportunity to establish clear standards and expectations for behavior and team culture that would send a strong message to the rest of the roster about what would and would not be tolerated moving forward. The challenge was obvious and immediate, losing a talented and experienced player while dealing with the very public nature of the conflict and the scrutiny that followed. However, it also provided a valuable opportunity to establish clear cultural standards and demonstrate strong leadership by showing that no player, regardless of talent level or contract status, would be allowed to undermine team chemistry and organizational values. What's absolutely clear is that this viral moment and its extensive aftermath have created a fascinating and comprehensive case study in modern NFL team building, player psychology, organizational culture, and the enormous power of social media to amplify and accelerate personnel decisions that might have been handled very differently in previous eras of professional football. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.